storyteller is a local baker and barista. She's also a member of the board of Oaks and Spokes, which is a great bicycle advocacy group here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she is definitely a late bloomer. I really enjoy getting to know her through the story writing process. Please welcome to the stage to tell a story she calls It Takes a Village, Dawn Keyser.
What's up, guys? Let's get this over with quickly so we can all go watch Game of Thrones. So, my story is basically about a lifetime of dealing with anxiety and basically not being able to cope with that until I was an adult. So a little bit of backstory. I was born into a very low-income, rural family in North Carolina. My parents were only 16. My dad didn't stick around at first. He had some soul searching to do, but eventually he came back and became a permanent part of my life. I lived with my mom, visited dad every other weekend and on holidays, which I'm sure some of you in split families understand. So from the start, I didn't really have a solid family foundation to work on. We had a happy family, I was a happy kid, but without that one solid piece of family, it can be kind of hard to put your roots down. We didn't have much money, but I didn't know that as a kid. I was happy. Until I got to school. Kindergarten was basically where I learned that school was embarrassing. Before I started school, I remember being really boisterous and confident, loud, just a very excitable kid. And I first learned that I shouldn't be loud and I shouldn't call attention to myself unless I wanted to incur the wrath of the teacher in kindergarten. First grade wasn't much better. We lived in upstate New York for about 2 years. That's where my stepfather's family is from. And my first grade teacher decided she was going to stomp the South out of me. Didn't like my accent. She would openly mock me in class. She would call out my mistakes in class. And it was not a good foundation to set for school. When we finally moved back to North Carolina, I was the new kid in class. I was already very shy, very bookish, made good grades. To top it all off, I got glasses. I was officially the definition of a nerd. And everybody knows what happens to nerds in school. I was that kid who invited her whole class to her birthday parties, and nobody would ever come, except for my one or two little friends. And this is, this probably sounds super sad, but it wasn't all bad. I had friends. I'm not saying that I was super persecuted. It's typical, we all deal with shit in school. But I definitely learned that sticking out was bad news. Other kids were not really to be trusted, sometimes to be feared, and that's something that kind of stuck with me as I went through school in later years. I never really learned to be confident and to stand up for myself. High school was definitely awkward, got picked on the bus, hated being called on in class, but I was a good student, had my own little group of friends, occasional boyfriends. But that was about the extent of my social growth in high school as the oldest kid in a poor, rural, southern family. I was the one tasked with taking care of the house when both of my parents were away working. So when you have 3 younger siblings to take care of, a house to clean, and dinner to cook, it doesn't leave much time for hanging out after school or going to parties, doing typical teenage activities that a lot of you probably experienced. I didn't really get to experience that. Even despite all of that stuff, I was still a pretty happy kid, very shy. I had my pleasures in life, and it was fine. But then came college, and college is of course a time of change and transition for everybody. I was no different. My mom remarried and moved to Guam, left me behind to start college on my own. It's from even having 2 families, neither of them had a lot of money and both had a lot of kids, so I was pretty much on my own. So it was glorious and it was terrifying because like I said, I grew up taking care of the family, not having much time for myself, and all of a sudden all my time is for myself. And I don't know what to do with that because my entire life has been centered around home and taking care of people and having just that one very small group of people that's like the center of your life. And I was realizing that I had been very sheltered, and that was kind of overwhelming. So I had the typical college first experiences. Maybe for some of you, they were more high school experiences. You know, losing virginity, first time smoking weed, first time getting drunk. All of that was like well after I was 18. So that's probably another part of the late blooming process. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention I didn't have time, like I wasn't allowed to have a job in high school because I had to take care of kids. I did finally start working when I got to college because I had to. My parents couldn't really afford to help out much. And I was finding it very difficult to cope with this vast array of new responsibilities, dealing with the social aspect of school, having to work, having to hold myself afloat financially. And that's a lot when you're a tiny girl that grew up in a rural North Carolina town. And it was kind of at this point in college that the anxiety really started to set in. Even as I was growing more socially, you know, I had coworkers and they had friends, I would hang out with them. That was cool, I would go to parties. But I wasn't able to really engage professionally in a school setting. I was terrified of talking to teachers. I still hate group projects. I avoided study groups. I completely lacked the capacity for networking, and I actually hated the idea of networking. I remember there was one required class for freshmen that you had to take where they taught you how to write a resume and do interviews. One major part of our grade was a mock interview, and I refused to go to it. I had my outfit picked out and everything, and at the last minute I was like, fuck it, I can't do this. This is pointless anyways. On top of all of that, I had to work 20 to 30 hours a week to support myself. So internships were kind of out the window. If I had been a more outgoing person, maybe I could have managed it. But just the idea was terrifying. I was way too scared at that point in my life to try anything that was hard or that was out of my comfort zone. Post-college was a blur of awkward relationship blunders and bad work experiences. I had been way too overwhelmed by the college experience. I didn't feel confident enough in myself to apply for jobs in my career path. I was a zoology major, and I did not have the strength of will to continue school and apply to vet school, which is what my original intent was. So I continued to work odd jobs to support myself, and things went on in this fashion. Service jobs, bad boyfriends, until 2011 when shit hit the fan. I got fired for the first time. I lost what was to my mind at the time the love of my life, who actually was a huge abusive asshole, and I'm glad to be rid of him. But you know, our young selves, we get, it's overwhelming. And then also I lost my first grandparent that year, and this was in the space of about 3 months. I lost my first job, lost what I thought was an awesome guy, and I lost my grandmother. And that's probably what I would consider to be the low point of my life. Basically, it was the first, even after dealing with anxiety, being depressed, and like unsure of myself, I had never really actually wanted to commit suicide before. But after that just great storm of events, that was the closest I ever came. I wrote a note, I had the pills laid out, I was in bed, and something stopped me. I think that it was mostly fear. I was more afraid of death than I was afraid of life, and I decided that the fear had to stop. I'm not going to say the next few months were great. They were definitely still I was very numb, and I don't remember a whole lot about it. But at some point I decided that, you know what, I lost all my friends because of this shitty breakup. I need to go out and meet some new people. So I started running. I did a couple of the run clubs around here. There's one for Tiernook, one for Big Boss. And it was cool, it was nice to get some exercise, meet a couple of new people, but anybody of you that runs knows it's really hard to talk to people when you're running. And there were always such huge crowds at the post-run drinking fest. There was just too many people, I couldn't take it, so I would leave. And around that time I started hanging out with an older friend who liked to ride bikes. And I was like, okay, well, I enjoyed riding bikes when I was younger. Let's give this a try. He helped me buy an old crappy bike on Craigslist. We fixed it up. He took me on a couple of rides. Actually took my first ride downtown, and I still remember how thrilling it was to ride down that huge hill on Cabarrus. You guys that ride bikes know what I'm talking about. It was awesome. But I met another guy shortly after that. We were just friends. He took me on a couple of Greenway rides. It was really awesome, and that guy actually introduced me to my current boyfriend, Joe, who many of you know. And our first bonding experience was biking and going on Greenway rides. And he has really awesome calves. If you've never ridden a bike behind him, it's really awesome. So part of our bonding was biking, and we got into doing the Benelux social rides. We were just looking for more ways to have fun biking. And I don't know how many of you have been, there's something about finding your group of people. I didn't know it at the time, but cyclists are some of the most fun-loving, awesome, cool people, and I had never known it in my life up until then. And something about going to these social rides, hanging out with people that I had never really, it was something I never really knew that was possible, that I would want to talk to people, that I would want to introduce myself to people. This was the first time in my life I ever felt comfortable enough to actually walk up to someone and be like, hey, I saw you on the ride, what's your name? And have a conversation. You had a common ground to go on, which made it a lot easier. And because of biking, I would say it opened up a whole new chapter in my life and made me want to do other things. Currently, I volunteer for 4 different organizations. As Justin said, I'm on the board of Oaks and Spokes. I work 2 different jobs, and I'm working on putting myself out there and living life more because I had a community to start that growth inside of me. I'm really over my time, but I wanted to leave you with a stupid metaphor. If you think of yourself as a seed, and a seed has the endosperm inside of it, which has all the energy that a seed needs to grow, to sprout into a plant. But it has to have the right environment. If you don't plant that seed in nice warm soil and water it, it's never going to grow. So you have the strength inside of you, but sometimes you just need the right environment to blossom.